Welcome to North of 60. I'm Heidi Schweighofer. Today we're going to talk about funerals with my guest, Chad Hein. Chad is a lifelong Ohioan. He received his Bachelor's of Science in Mortuary Science, his MBA in Business Management. He has been with his funeral home since 2010. And I found it fascinating to learn from him why he selected this field to go into. So thank you so much for being here, Chad.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I want to talk about the book.
So I started out after I graduated high school at Ohio State University. I was a business finance major. My freshman English class, one of the books that was required reading was called The Undertaking, Life Studies from the Dismal Trade by a funeral director in Milford, Michigan. His name's Tom Lynch. He wrote some other books too, and that book inspired me to look into funeral service. I've always had an interest in business operations, counseling, and medical science. So funeral business encompasses all three of those. A funeral home is a business, so we have the operational standpoint. We're working with the bereaved in that counseling, and then the embalming brings in the medical sciences.
Sure.
So,
well, what was in the book that so interested you? Was it his message about life and death?
It was a very pragmatic view on which he took with life and death. Death is part of life. You know, sometimes people don't want to talk about it or acknowledge it, but it has to be. It's a fact of life. So
yeah, it is. It's a very tough subject for people to talk about. I told you my father, up until he died at 99, just would not talk about anything related to funerals or his passing.
You know, at minimum, you want to make your family aware of what your wishes are. You know, oftentimes I'll sit down with somebody and, would you like burial or cremation? And they go, we don't know. You know, dad or mom never talked about it, and it makes things more challenging.
Sure.
At a very difficult time.
We're going to talk about pre-planning and sort of us taking control for what our wishes are before we pass away. I want to talk about two things quickly, though. First, one is I have to tell you that I was inspired by your website. I just always do some research there, and it was a very family-oriented mission or message that you gave, and I that really hit me. It was a very lovely thing to read about how important family and the people who are coming in are to you all working there.
We try to treat everybody that comes to entrust us with the care of their loved one as we would treat our own family. Somebody's loved one is a very important thing, and it's a very difficult time. So we try to serve people with compassionate service with excellence.
Excellent. Good.
Is my general approach to things.
Good. It came through. Now, I want to talk about the one thing we talked about when we first met on the phone is your location. I know that you are right outside that big cemetery on 91. Mm-hmm. Tell me, I thought it was all one big property.
So we are a funeral home on the grounds of Crown Hill. We work hand in hand with them. However, I also serve other cemeteries. I'm just as likely to be at St. Mary's or Markilly in Hudson or Lakeview in Cleveland. We are a full-service funeral home. We just happen to be located on the grounds of a cemetery.
Okay. And you're in that absolutely stunning building right in the front. Is it as beautiful inside as it is on the outside?
It was built in 1928. It used to serve as the old cemetery chapel. In 2002, it was renovated into the funeral home as it stands now. It's built from what they call exploded brick or clinker brick, which makes that very oblong
Yes,
shape.
yes.
Same brick that's in the cemetery walls and also another building on the cemetery. It is beautiful inside architecturally. I've not been in a funeral home that has that same architecture.
I would well imagine. I always admire it when I go by. That brickwork is just beautiful. All right, now, I want to talk about COVID first, because it's the pressing thing all of us are dealing with anymore these days. My father passed away in May, and my sister and I could not hold a funeral for him at that time. Actually, everything had to be done with no folks present except my sister and I. So let's talk about how that affects your business. What sort of CDC guidelines do you have? Is it safe for me as a mourner to go to a visitation or a funeral of someone who's passed away from COVID? Talk about that first.
So when the pandemic first hit, obviously with everything being shut down, we, from March when things closed down until right about June 1st, we were limiting to 10 people or less in attendance in the building at a time. It was very challenging. You know, I've been doing this stuff for 16 years to have to tell a family, no, I'm sorry, we can't do a full funeral.
I imagine.
You know, and it wasn't that we had to say that just once. It was multiple times, you know, I mean.
So every funeral, regardless of the reason that the person passed away, you had to limit at that point to 10.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, that may not even be somebody's entire family.
And those were the challenges. It was difficult. You know, we were able to, on occasion, cycle, 10 people in, and then somebody goes out and another person comes in. But when this first happened, everybody was very scared and they were shutting everything down. So we were extremely cautious.
Sure.
Present day, inside my building, I'm still limiting to 25 or less in attendance of a funeral or a visitation.
Now, how many do you normally hold in real?
We can seat 105 people.
Oh my goodness.
But to ensure, we want to be safe.
Sure.
I see enough death. I don't want to create more. It's a lot of sorrow. So, our guidelines, generally speaking, we're going to want to see people wearing a mask if they're able when they attend, that type of thing. That's kind of current day. With visitations, people will cycle to where there's, somebody comes in, somebody goes out, that type of thing.
If you you can hold a service for 25 people, I assume that you have to distance chairs and.
Yep. That's hence our limit because of the social distancing. So.
Gosh, that's hard, isn't it?
Yep.
I think of any business right now that it's so hard on everybody. You folks too, I would imagine, just knowing that you have to make those determinations and tell the family, I'm sorry, and to tell friends, we can't.
And certainly if we go into a larger facility such as a church, then we can expand attendance. During the summer months and so forth, we've done a lot of graveside services outside. We don't have to limit.
Oh, sure. I didn't think about that.
Yep.
All
so
right.
we've done stuff outside. We've gotten creative.
Do you have specific CDC guidelines that you have to follow when there's a pandemic like this for not only handling the deceased, but as you said, preparing your
So the CDC is going to want us wearing appropriate protective equipment, and handling our big concern is when we have a deceased who is COVID positive and we have to perform the embalming process, or if we're transporting them, we have to ensure that you know.
Are you full PPE then?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh
it's,
my
I mean,
gosh.
it's, you know, it's head covering, face shield at 95, a respirator, usually 2 gowns, double glove, that type of thing.
Oh my gosh, yes. Is it safe for me as a mourner to visit, do you think, or to see if I know that this gentleman passed of COVID? Is it safe for me to be there?
So we, you know, I tend to try to counsel people, you know, make decisions that you're comfortable with. Everybody has a different comfort level. You know, certainly we encourage the use of masks.
Yeah.
But as far as risk and everything, I urge people to operate at their comfort level. You know, I can't ascertain a specific level of risk to any gathering. It's just do what you're comfortable with. You know, if you're not comfortable attending, send a card to the family, make those phone calls, not only right after the death occurs, but 6 months after, you know, after the casseroles have stopped and the out-of-town family has left. Oftentimes, somebody who suffered a loss, you know, it's those months after that people need help sometimes too.
Isn't that the truth? I am so glad you brought that up because everyone is there immediately and not everyone, but offering comfort and what can I do for you and how can I help? But very shortly thereafter, that can stop. And then it's the grieving person who has to start dealing with life.
Mm-hmm. You can't run from grief. You have to go through it. And if you try to run from it, it eventually will catch you. And I've watched it destroy people's lives. And that is so very sad to me, you know.
That they never dealt with the grief in the first place?
You know, every family I work with, we partner with a company that provides free grief counseling over the phone. It's available 24/7, 365. And I urge everybody that works with us to use it at least once. You know, even as a funeral director, if I have somebody in my family die, you know, whether it's a pastor or a counselor or something, I'm going to at least talk to somebody at least once.
What a good idea. So, and that's a free service that
Yep.
you provide for
Yep.
anybody who's dealt with your, I think that is an excellent idea. I really do. You don't, people, if you don't have anything, then you're not going to try to seek it out. And I have known widows who have just stopped their lives when their husband died and have not resumed really living.
Yeah.
So counseling is such an important part of this. I am happy to hear that you have that. That makes me feel good. All right. Is there anything else related to COVID that I, as Joe Schmo coming in, would need to know? Of course, I'd wear my mask. I'm
Wear
safe.
your mask, maintain your distance. We do our best to try to help keep people distanced.
All right. There's going to be hugging, though.
We can only do what we can do.
I know.
You know, we just try to encourage people to be safe. Most importantly, do stuff that you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
You
yeah.
know, that's
yeah.
the most.
That's what we all have to be doing nowadays. I mean,
Yeah.
for everything, going to a restaurant. I agree. I want to talk about regular funerals, Chad. So not COVID funerals, but when you first came in, we talked about planning, and I love the idea of pre-planning. Talk about who, why, when, the whole thing for pre-planning a funeral.
So there's two facets to pre-planning. There's pre-planning, meaning that, you know, I'm making my final wishes known. Okay, you know, I wish to be buried or wish to be cremated. I would like to have an open casket, public visitation. I don't want any of that, you know, those type of things. So I urge everybody to do that at minimum. You know, make your family aware of what your wishes are. The second facet to it is prepaying. in Ohio and in most other states, through various mechanisms, you can prepay for your funeral service. In Ohio, funeral homes are required to have the money put directly into a trust account or into an insurance policy. I utilize an insurance vehicle in my funeral home to hold our pre-arrangement funds. Generally speaking, that locks in a price guarantee. So the price you pay in today's dollars, you pass away 20, 30 years from now, the price remains the same.
Oh,
As the money sits in the insurance policy, it gains a little bit of interest. It's not much, similar
No.
to what you'd see on your savings account. But if at the time of death, the money in the policy is not enough to fund the retail prices of the funeral at that time, the funeral home will issue a discount to bring that price down to what was in the pre-arrangement policy.
I had no idea. I have wondered what happens when, if someone did prepay and I'm 67 and I don't die till I'm 97, what happens with my heirs at that point? Do they have to pay even more? That's neat.
So and I can only speak to my funeral home and how
Okay, that's all right.
I operate. Some funeral homes offer price guarantees, some do not. We do it at my funeral home, but each funeral home is different. So those are questions to ask when you're considering pre-arrangement. Is this a price guarantee?
That's a good idea. What about, let's say I do this and, God forbid you go out of business when I'm 80 years old.
So that's why the money's held with an insurance company. The insurance company is regulated by the Ohio Department of Insurance. There are mechanisms in place to protect your money if the insurance company, God forbid, were to go under. So that's why the money is held with a separate entity. It's for consumer protection. You maintain control of your funds while they're in that insurance policy. Let's say you decide I'm moving to Florida or moving to, North Carolina or South Carolina, something like that.
Yeah.
You can transfer that policy with you and usually find a funeral home that will accept
it. All right. Do you advise people pre-planning? Frankly, the prepayment, I think, is a really good idea. I didn't know that price is guaranteed. I think that would be a weight off your family's shoulders. Okay, but do you recommend across the board that people pre-plan?
Yes.
Why?
Death is a fact of life. You need to let your family know what they have to do when you pass. So that way you're not leaving them in a lurch per se at a very, very difficult time. Or if the death is very sudden, families need to know. Talking about it often helps. We encounter a lot of people that don't want to talk about this subject, but after you get them talking about it, eventually there's a certain level of comfort that comes into place. I meet with people frequently where they just make their wishes known, and I put it on our files. So that way, when something happens, we at least know where to start.
So I could come to you and say, I want you to make sure that my daughter knows I want this, this, this.
Mm-hmm. You can come in and make selections. I'm
No
not
kidding.
I'm not a salesperson. I want people, my main overall goal is I want you to be as comfortable as you can be. Being inside a funeral home or working with a funeral home can be very unsettling. So we try to make folks as comfortable as possible. I'm just there to present options.
Chad, have you seen conflict in families when the deceased hasn't made their wishes known?
Many, many times, more than I can count. And our job is not to make the decisions for the family. These are tough things that have to be worked out. So we try to guide people along the path, and then they figure it out from there.
Good planning. I am a big planner, and I like the idea of having control over what will happen with my remains. And I want to talk a bit about the options. I hope this doesn't get too macabre, but I hear about green funerals. I know that there's cremation. I know that there's then different ways that one can do cremated remains, burial, vaults, all of that stuff. Kind of talk a little bit about each one of those.
So we can, start with the burial aspect of things. With burial, many times people will equate, an open casket visitation and that type of thing followed by burial. Likewise with cremation, you can also have the open casket public visitation prior to. Cremation and burial are just the end of the road.
Oh.
You have your choice as to what you wish to do up to that point.
Okay.
With burial, depending on the cemetery, often the cemetery will require some type of burial container. Usually that's a casket and then the burial vault, which is a box. It can be a concrete box that the casket is placed into. It can be a domed metal vault.
Okay.
Cemeteries require that to help keep the ground level.
Okay.
With the subject of green funerals, there are green cemeteries that have gone into existence. The idea behind a green funeral oftentimes is that the deceased is just buried in a shroud and placed in the ground. And then dirt is placed over the grave, and in many places it's just left to grow. And, a marker stone may be put in place, but, many times these cemeteries, it's out in the woods.
So, okay, that one doesn't appeal to me so much. Cremation can be an urn in the ground, an urn on my fireplace, or I can be scattered.
Correct.
And if I choose to be scattered, what would my daughter have to know?
So it depends on where you're being scattered. Obviously, sometimes people choose to be scattered in rivers, gardens, woods, the lake. We tend to try to counsel people if you're scattering in a body of water, not advisable to stand on the bow of the boat and throw the cremated remains. They can blow back. We recommend that, gently pour it over the side of the... I'm trying to be as gentle with that one as possible.
Oh, I love it. Okay.
So
I'm learning things every day, I'll tell you.
And there is actually another method of disposition. It's not legal in Ohio, but it's called alkaline hydrolysis or water cremation. Basically, the deceased is placed into a cylinder, and it's a mixture of hot water and lye, essentially, and that just returns the person to their natural state, leaving behind remains very similar to what we would have with traditional fire cremation.
No kidding.
So there are...
I've never heard of that.
Again, it's not legal in Ohio. It's legal in 18 states right now. Hopefully Ohio will open their eyes to that soon enough. It has been left to where it's up to the legislator to make the decision.
I hope that legislator is a funeral person, but probably not.
Yeah, and that's, but that's something I'm sure will be coming in years to come.
I never have heard of that before. Well, I knew this was going to happen. Every time I write 2 pages of questions, time goes whizzing by. We have about 3 minutes or so. May I ask you one again? I hope this isn't a macabre question, but it did happen to our family. What do you do if a person, what should I do if a person, my mother in this case, dies at home?
So, if somebody is at home under the care of hospice, you would call hospice. If somebody passes away at home and they are not under hospice care,
But they are old and sick.
you still need to call 911.
Okay.
Yeah, if you are not under hospice, you need to call 911. If you are under hospice, you call hospice.
Now, when we call 911, do we tell them what funeral home we've worked with, if we have, or what our choice would be?
The most important thing is when, somebody appears to have passed away, that needs to be medically evaluated. That's why we call 911.
Then they bring someone to do a pulse and all that,
yeah.
vital sign thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, and there are various circumstances, if somebody passes away at home and they had a medical history behind them, many times after the medical examiner comes out, they may contact the primary physician, and the primary doctor says, yes, they'd been ill. I'm
Okay.
willing to sign the death certificate, and then they will release directly to the funeral home.
Okay.
So at that
All
time,
right.
we would come out, and we are 24/7, 365.
Excellent, because it can happen 24/7, 365. Chad, I am so sorry to tell you we now are down to 1 minute. Give me if you're sitting across from a healthy 67-year-old, what would you tell me about funerals?
Make decisions that you are comfortable with, first and foremost. Secondly, once you've made those decisions, make your family aware
Yeah.
of those decisions. Thirdly, have these conversations with your family. That, among everything, is the most important. Have these conversations.
And maybe when we have the conversation, we should write down what we wish and put it in the bank. Go visit the funeral home and say, hey, you don't know me and I'm hopefully doing pretty well, but I want you to keep this because I'll make sure my daughter knows it's here. Okay, yeah. Well, I can tell you that's what I'm planning to do. I'm not a person who likes things out of my control, so I would really like my wishes to be held by my daughter. Well, believe it or not, we are done with this episode of North of 60. If you'd like information about Hine Funeral Home, correct, that's the name, and Mr. Hine, we will make sure we have contact information on the screen when this show is complete. Thank you so much for being here. Didn't the time just fly by?
It went right by very quickly. I do appreciate you having me today. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Chad. Thank you for watching.